All right, so we are live.
Perfect.
So, hi everybody. Welcome to another Positively Family Law on this very gloomy and weird spring day.
However, I'm out of here tomorrow.
All of us to go to sunny Florida and go to Universal and leave us all here with this nonsense. So, thanks.
Yep, I'm gonna spend a week riding some roller coasters, screaming my head off.
Lucky. So anyway.
But today we talk about jurisdiction.
Yes, today we are talking about jurisdiction. So, first question. We have a lot of questions, so we're just going to go through this.
Then I probably have a lot of answers.
Probably. And we're probably going to talk about other stuff too. So, number one, what is jurisdiction?
So jurisdiction is basically the ability for the court to decide your case. So the court has to have jurisdiction, and I won't get into the difference between subject matter and personal, but basically the court has to have authority over you, which means it has jurisdiction of you in order to make an order that you have to abide by. So that's the easiest way to put it.
Okay, that was actually way easier than I thought it was going to be.
Well, if you want to get into like law school and get into the nitty gritty, it can be way more complicated, but it's basically the authority that the court has. They have to have jurisdiction in order to enter any sort of order or judgment over you. So that might be depending on where you live or whether you've been involved in a state. So within the divorce and custody, you're typically talking about the court has jurisdiction if you and your kids live there.
Gotcha. Okay.
But there's caveats, which I'm sure we're going to get into.
There always is. All right. So, how is jurisdiction enforced in family law?
So in different types of cases, they'll have different requirements for you to be able to file. So for a divorce, you have to have lived in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And for purposes of this discussion, we're only talking about Massachusetts. So every state, you might live in a different state, say Florida or Arkansas or, wherever, they might have a completely different statute on how long you have to live there before you can get a divorce. In Massachusetts, you have to live in Massachusetts for 1 year, or the breakdown of the marriage has to have occurred here. So typically, if you're married and you're living together and you live in Massachusetts, that's easy. You're going to get divorced here. Where it gets a little bit more tricky is where people haven't gotten divorced and they've already separated, and maybe somebody moved to a different state and then they've been apart we've done some divorces where they haven't lived together for over 10 years, but they're still married. And so that's where you get into what state has jurisdiction to grant that divorce. Now, when you talk about different issues, whether you're talking about restraining orders or you're talking about custody cases, the same thing typically goes. It's where you live. So,
okay. So what can be done if a jurisdictional issue occurs?
So if, for instance, let's take that same hypothetical I was just talking about with, they've been living apart for 10 years. Let's say the wife has moved to Connecticut and the husband still lives in Massachusetts. So then one of them decides, hey, I want to get a divorce. Where they've been apart for that long, it's a race to the courthouse. And that's pretty much what they call it. It's whoever gets there and files first will typically have the right to have that court hear their case. And where that becomes beneficial is if you're the one that lives in Connecticut, you don't want to have to drive all the way back to Massachusetts, which right now we're virtual, so the distance isn't that big of a deal. But previously, and assuming that things go back to normal, if you live in a state that's 3 hours away or even an hour away, you constantly, every time you have court, you have to drive there. There also might be different rules, and regularities with what the judges enforce within the different states. So some states might be more lenient towards awarding alimony, where other states might say, no, we typically don't hand it out. So if there's a jurisdictional issue, it's usually wise to run it by attorneys in both states and see where it benefits you most, and then quickly file if you're going to file in the state that benefits you. Now, if you haven't lived in either one of those states long enough to meet that jurisdictional requirement. So let's take our same hypothetical of our couple that they split up, and the wife moves to Connecticut, but the husband stays in Massachusetts. And then 6 months go by. So not 10 years, but 6 months. If at that point, the wife is the one who says, I want the divorce, well, she can't file in Connecticut yet. She would have to file in Massachusetts because she hasn't lived in Connecticut long enough. Although I'm pretty sure Connecticut also has a 1 year. But if you haven't met the jurisdictional issues within the state you moved to, you have to file in the state where you most recently resided with your spouse. So that's for that.
Okay. And now in terms of like custody, when you're dealing with like children, is there a certain jurisdiction of like how long the kids have lived in a state?
Yeah, so that can get a little bit complicated, especially when you have a divorce ongoing that is dealing with custody. So a court can only enter long-standing orders. So any court, regardless of where you are, if there's an emergent situation where their safety is at issue, or it's a domestic violence issue or a sexual issue, if there's anything that requires the children to be protected, any court anywhere has the emergent authority to be able to grant an order that everyone has to abide by. But that doesn't mean that that's longstanding. Home state jurisdiction is based on where the children live. So when you talk about regular jurisdiction, that's over the divorce in and of itself. That's the timeline requirement. When you talk about home state jurisdiction, that's the ability for the court to make orders over your children. So if you're doing both simultaneously, so now let's go back again to our hypo where they moved apart and they've been living apart for 10 years. And let's say the wife has taken the kids with her. So now the kids are in Connecticut. Once they've been in Connecticut for more than 6 months, if there was an agreement by dad, which also brings up another caveat, but if there was an agreement by dad for them to move to Connecticut and they're there for 6 months, then Connecticut will have home state jurisdiction over the children, which then means you can get divorced in either state, but only Connecticut is going to be the state that's able to make orders over those kids. So even if you agree that, hey, we're going to file in Massachusetts, you know, the wife has family here, she comes back all the time anyway, so we're going to file in Massachusetts and just get it done there. Massachusetts, if the kids have been living out of the state for 6 months, is not going to have the authority to grant orders over the children, and that can't be waived. So you can't say, oh, well, that's okay, we're not going to worry about that, because any order that the court enters can then be vacated because they just don't have the statutory authority to be able to do it. Now, where there's always a caveat is if, let's say mom and dad are together and mom says, can't stand you anymore, I'm leaving. And she ups and picks up the kids and he says, no, I don't want my kids in Connecticut, I want them here. Well, then he can run and file at the court and say that he's not in agreement with the kids living there. And then Massachusetts, if they haven't been there for 6 months, is going to have home state jurisdiction and can make the children come back. Now, let's take a situation where mom and dad aren't necessarily married. You know, it's a non-married parenting issue. And they break up, but they're both living in Massachusetts. And then mom decides, okay, I'm sick of Massachusetts, I'm out of here, moving to Connecticut. And then dad finds out, and she didn't run it by him, so he has no idea, and he just finds out. He can then go to court, same thing as the husband, and say, no, I want them back. But let's say 6 months goes by and he just has no clue where they are. Well, that is not necessarily going to make that 6 months start rolling. But in that type of situation, it really, again, comes down to who gets to the court first. So it's always important, if there's 2 different states involved, find an attorney that knows about the jurisdictional issues to advise you, one, on the benefits of where you could go, as well as just telling you what your options are, as well as telling you the caveats and the what could come into play if, for instance, say it's the other way around and they lived in Connecticut and one moves here and they call us and they say, hey, we want you to represent us in your divorce. if they haven't been here for a full year and they file here, our job would be to tell the client, hey, you can do that. But if she disputes jurisdiction, it's going to get a little bit messy and the case could end up in Connecticut anyway. So typically you don't want to make more work for yourself. You want to make sure that you're filing in the right spot.
Of course. So what is venue?
So venue is within a state. So every state has their little counties. We've got Plymouth County, Bristol County, Worcester County, Middlesex, it goes on and on, Norfolk. Those are all the venues. So you might live in Massachusetts, but if, for instance, I live in Hanover, if I'm living in Hanover and I want to file for a divorce and we've lived in Hanover, which is Plymouth County, I can't go to Worcester and file for a divorce without getting leave of the court. And it's a big process to be able to do it because the venue would be in Plymouth County. Mm-hmm. Now, same as jurisdiction, if you separate and then you have two people living in different counties, it's a question of where do you go? And if it hasn't been for more than a year, typically you'll go back to wherever you guys live together.
Gotcha. Okay. So what happens if someone files in the wrong court?
It depends on, one, whether the court catches it, two, what it is, whether it's about, the length of the term of the marriage or about the kids. The jurisdiction of the kids cannot be waived. So there's some things like subject matter jurisdiction. If you don't live in the county or the state, but you submit to that jurisdiction, the court can make some orders over you. Now, if you don't live there and you want to file somewhere else, you can file a motion to dismiss based on either lack of subject matter or, personal jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, or home state jurisdiction. So you can file to have that all go away and then refile in the place where you live. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it can just get messy. It's Friday and I'm really excited about going on vacation, so I'm not thinking right now.
Understandable. Jealous, but understandable. So can you waive home state jurisdiction?
Nope. Yeah, we see that a lot. People try to say that, they enter into a custody arrangement, whether through the divorce or whether through their custody litigation. And they try to say, the rules of Massachusetts have been applied to this and forever will be bound by Massachusetts. Now, there's some truth to a later court possibly having to apply Massachusetts law, but you cannot waive home state jurisdiction. So you can't say, I'm going to let my kids go live in Florida, but Massachusetts is going to retain jurisdiction. You just can't do it. Once the kids live in Florida for 6 months, Florida is going to take that over.
Okay, gotcha. So I don't think this really has to do with jurisdiction, but I do see it pretty commonly in the realm of so in the realm of this, but now I'm trying to figure out how to word the question.
It's Friday. Maybe we should do these on Mondays.
So touching on what you said of someone can't just pick up the kids and decide to leave without getting permission from the other parent. What is how would they go about if someone wants to move out of state, but one parent is kind of being a little no, it's not happening. I don't want that. How do you fix that? How do you work with that?
So in those situations, it's always best. And some of this, everything that deals with jurisdiction and relocation, which is what you're talking about, can be very tricky. Because when you're talking about relocation, which again is the exact situation you're asking about, it depends on whether they were married or not, because a married couple automatically has joint legal custody over their children. Mm-hmm. An unmarried couple, the guy gets squat until the court appoints it to him. So a lot of men think that they have a baby, their name goes on the birth certificate, and they have legal rights over their kids. No, that is not true. You have no legal authority or responsibility really technically you absolutely do have a responsibility, but technically, you can't tell mom what she can and can't do because you have no legal rights, not until you file in court.
Mhm.
So then it also plays in on how involved the other parent is. So let's say it's a situation where they're married and dad's the primary caretaker, mom's run off or whatever, and she doesn't really have a lot to do with her kids. Maybe she sees them once a month, maybe twice a month. If dad wants to move, he's going to have a much better chance because of the fact mom doesn't really have a great relationship with the kids. So it's going to be easier for him to make the argument. And there's two different standards that need to be applied depending on what the parenting time is. Now, if it's a situation where the parents are sharing physical custody fairly closely, so, let's say both parents are really involved, even if it's not a straight 50-50 down the middle, if both parents are really involved and, interactive with the kids, and the court can look at it as it is a shared parenting schedule, then it's a different burden that needs to be shown in order for that parent to leave.
Gotcha.
So, and again, what dad would have to do, what anybody should do, even though sometimes moms with legal rights that aren't married to dad have a little bit of advantage where they can leave easier. But technically everybody should be filing in court and asking for permission to leave, or you need the written permission of the other person, especially if you're married or there's already a court order relating to the custody.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, anything else that you have to say about jurisdiction?
I'm sure there is. That seemed too short for for how complicated it is.
Oh.
I think some of the reasons that you get into the interplay between Massachusetts or another state, and something to take into consideration if you do have the opportunity to choose, is that currently Massachusetts, if you are married, nobody can force you to pay for college for your children. In Massachusetts, if you are going to court over custody of your kids, whether you're divorced or separate, in Massachusetts, they can tell you, hey, you gotta pay for your kid. And it doesn't really seem fair. Like it's obviously good for the kids, but it doesn't seem fair that as long as you have an intact marriage, nobody can tell you that you have to contribute. It could be a situation where you tell your kid, hey, skin in the game, you're paying for it, so you do well at it. I'm not going to give you a free party ride. This is something you have to work for, get scholarships, play sports, do whatever you can in order to get there. In Massachusetts, the judge can say, well, you're responsible for paying half of the tuition level at UMass Amherst, which is approximately $32,000 per year. So in Massachusetts, your kids can be adults, because they're over the age of 18. And you can also be paying child support while they go off to college and have to pay college tuition, which is a lot. So it's a fight that's often there. Most other states don't require that. Massachusetts also has more liberal paying, the calculation for the payor. You typically get more support than in some of our neighboring states. So all those things, depending on what you're looking for, whether you're looking to not pay or you're looking for more money, those are all things that can influence where you should file.
Well, this is definitely like a good overview. I think we could probably even pick like one topic from what we talked about today and like do a whole other video in terms of that. So I guess the biggest point to take into consideration is like in Massachusetts, it's a full year for a divorce unless you can really prove that the breakdown of the marriage occurred here in the state. Mm-hmm. And for kids, it's 6 months. So just keep that in mind. And if you have questions about jurisdiction in your matter, like call an attorney, call us. We can definitely go over that and kind of let you know if this is something you should be filing here, or if this is something that you should speak to an attorney out of state. We can.
Let me add one more thing. Mm-hmm. So let's say you get divorced in another state, or you have a custody order from another state and you move to Massachusetts, because this comes up a lot in regard to jurisdiction. So now you've lived here, you've got the kids, you've lived here for the 6 months to establish home state jurisdiction. What you want to do to protect yourself moving forward is take your judgment from the other court, and it's called registering it within Massachusetts. And that way the court has it. So if there's anything that you need to file a contempt or you need to modify it in any way, the court already has it, so they can move fairly quickly. Elsewise, you're going to have to go through that whole process, and you risk the fact that the other person can still file in the other state, because the court's not going to know that you're not there. They just know that they have that judgment. So if you're moving, make sure you think of that. Just as you would change your address for your license, you want to make sure you're registering your custody agreement or your divorce agreement, so that way if you need the court here, you can move forward with it.
Yeah. And another thing too, like, attorneys only know their state information. So,
Yes.
you know, when you're calling an attorney, if your case is out of Texas, don't call us. Like, we can't even provide advice at that point, because again, the laws are different and the situation is entirely different in either state. So make sure when you have a situation, whatever state you're in, you're calling an attorney in that state that's licensed and practices in that state.
Yep. And so for us specifically, you know, we're licensed, we mainly work in Massachusetts, but we're also licensed in Rhode Island. We are not licensed anywhere else, but typically we can give referrals out in the neighboring areas. You know, I've got a fairly wide network. Sometimes I can find, attorneys in other states. So, but if you're calling about your own case, we can actually provide you the advice.
Yeah, absolutely. So just remember that.
Because we get a lot of them.
Apparently Florida and Massachusetts are like the same. Like,
Yep.
people just like, all right. Well, I think this was great. This was a very good touch base as far as, like, you know, kind of really understanding, I guess, like almost state lines essentially, of like how it all works in relation to family law. So I guess have a great vacation.
Thank you. So next week, we won't be doing this because I'm
No,
not doing it on vacation.
no.
Or maybe I'll let you know.
Well,
But
I may be able to
probably not.
interview Jolie. Maybe we can bother Jolie and see if she wants to be interviewed, and then we can learn a little bit about her. I'm not sure what her schedule looks like.
Maybe. I'm pretty sure she has a crazy schedule next week, but who knows? Maybe. Or I'll just do it from the beach and be like, hey.
We can all just trash talk her in the comments. If not, we'll let you guys know either way about what we're going to do. Maybe we'll do a pre-recorded one or something like that, or like a voiceover one. Who knows? But we'll put something out either way. So enjoy your vacation, and
Thank you very much.
so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, everybody.